Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to discuss a Pakistani poem. It is written by Shumaila Shafket Ali. The title of this poem is Time Passes By. This poem is an interesting poem because this poem is open to different analysis point of view and different dimensions. The first and the outer surface dimension of this poem is that this poem talks about how past is always connected to the present, how past always comes in the path of present. Shumaila talks about the transformation of a person, how a person can transform himself from past into the present, because it is the past experiences that shape the present of a person, that shape the present of a human being, because people learn from past. When a person starts learning from the past, his present is usually a successful present. But there is a issue because the past always wants to dominate. The thoughts of past, they always want to dominate the thoughts of present, because they want to tell the thoughts of present to do this, to do this, to do this in that way, and to do this in that fashion. But present, because present has already learned from the past and the present wants to explore new dimensions, new thoughts. So present wants a freedom. By this we mean the mind of a person. The mind of a person wants to aloof itself from the past. But past is like a lover or a true lover who is always clingy to the present, who is always clingy to the path of the present. So it is almost difficult for a person to balance when and how to use the past experiences in the present, and when and how to detach present from the past. So the outer surface deals with this concept of how a person can transform himself from past to present. But the dilemma is that past and present, they always fight together, because present wants its own way while the past create obstacles in the way of the present. So this makes the future suffer. A person suffer because he is unable to cope with the past in the present, and he is unable to explore new dimension of the present, to experiment in the present, to view new angles for the present for a successful future. So the dilemma is that in this way, or in this issue, the future always suffer, because there is always an uncertainty about the future. There is always a dilemma about the future, what to do and what should have been done. So this was the first major thing that we can think about when we read this poem. Because the issue is that past and present, they cannot go in a parallel way. One has to dominate and the other has to be subdued. So if the past is a dominating factor, then the present, a person living in the present cannot go ahead for a future binding. While if the present is very much dominating, then the past is somehow creating disturbances. We are talking about the collective consciousness or the consciousness of the psyches. So this is the problem. Maintaining a right balance is usually difficult for a person or for a human being, and because of these issues, the future of a human being always suffers. Now, another important point that we can discuss in this poem is the search of an identity. Because we know that when the colonial era started in different parts of the world, so the problem with those colonialism or those colonialist powers were that they amalgamated the native or indigenous religion with the foreign religion, the native and indigenous culture with the foreign culture, the native and indigenous language with the foreign language. So what happened? An amalgamation form was formed, a sort of hybrid identity was formed, because a person, if he or she wanted to be successful in the future, he or she had to adopt the new ways of living. Means the English culture, means the English education system, means English as a language, while at the same time his or her roots that were based in his own indigenous religion, that could be like anyone, or his or her own indigenous culture, were basically very firm. So leaving those leaving those roots and adopting this new religion, culture, and way of life was difficult, and the balance, people were not able to maintain a balance, because they would start leaving their own culture and religion, they would start adopting the new religion and culture and language, and in this way they would go into a space called third space. It is called by Homi K. Baba as third space, because the hybrid identity can go for a certain period of time, but a time comes when a person is neither belonging to the foreign culture, language, or religion, and he is not able to cope up with his own religion, culture, and language. So in this process, he loses his own identity, he loses his own true identity, and this creates a third identity, or it's create a sort of sense where a person loses his own identity and he is no one, because the foreign culture and language, the foreigners or the colonial masters, they do not accept, while he is now far away from his own indigenous roots, that he cannot go back. So in this lingering of in between the past and the present, the future is always confused, because he or she can go with the future, but with what identity, but with which concept of mind, but with which thought, because his past belongs to a religion, culture which he abhorred, which he is now not in favor of, while the present is usually in the favor of the culture, religion, and language which he wants to, but he cannot master it, or because the masters are not accepting it. So this fight between the past and the present is usually disturbing the future, because for the future it is the problem with him. And this can be seen as the case with so many Pakistani writers, Pakistani novelists, and Pakistani people, because they previously believed that they belong to the identity of subcontinent identity, but then they transformed themselves into the identity of Islam or Muslim identity or Pakistani identity, while previously it was different identity, then it was different identity, but those two identities are always, and they will always be under the shadow of the English identity. So they are basically confused which identity to follow, which identity to choose, and which identity to go with in the future. So this poem Time Passes by Shumaila Shafket Ali, she is trying to inculcate this into the mind, that when past is a sufferance, or in the past a person has suffered, his present is always suffering, and this suffering goes on into the future. Why? Because maintaining a balance from the past and the present and moving them in a parallel way is usually a very difficult task, and in this balancing a person is always liable to lose his or her own identity. So this poem is basically teaching us the search of an identity, how to find our identity, how to see our identity, and how to look for our identity in the future, because past and present, they are not going along, they are creating disturbances. Past, the amalgamation of past and present is basically a chaos, and we need to come out of this chaos, because if you want to take them alongside, it is impossible, because she says all the efforts to transform the shreds of time into a unified whole prove futile. So what we need to do is that we have to look for the past, we have to live in the present, and then we have to make an identity, we have to make an exploration, we have to make an adventure in the past which can carry these two identities for some extent, but we have to make ourselves clear of how to move on with the future, because time passes by And she says that between the two dimensions of the time, because present and past, they are the dimensions of time, the future suffers. So we have to eliminate this point. We must not make our future suffer. We must make it a brightful and a successful future. I hope I have discussed this poem in a way which seems a bit difficult, but if we just look at the words very carefully and how this poem has been constructed, we can come across this issue in detail. If there is any question, you can put it in the comment box. Stay tuned till our next video. Thank you very much, and Allah Hafiz.